the one which ended his career. Strategic necessity he always saw early and never hesitated to carry out whatever policies they demanded. Now that he had dismissed Hundeville, the official representative of the French government and his acknowledged superior, he saw that he had now to crush the biracial state of Ragout. The great danger now was a French expedition, and it was self-unaliving to allow Ragout and his biracial people to remain in control of the South and West. They would most likely welcome the French force and ensure the ruin of the Black State. It is easy to misjudge Ragout. For him, France was the mother country still, who had made free men of biracial people and black people. Quote, I grieve to see this, the most cruel blow that has ever been struck against those of us in San Domingo, whom the revolution was made to live again. The Directory will see its authority nullified in this colony. The whole of France will believe that we wish to make ourselves independent, as a crowd of fools already saying and believing. Ragout sent in his resignation to Toussaint. Ragout sent in his resignation to Toussaint. If it were accepted, then inevitably Bovias would succeed him, and Bovias, Toussaint, and Ramin would be able, perhaps, to make unity a reality. Ragout plead, quote, he, Ramin, will no doubt consult you as the choice of my successor. I once more assure you, Citizen General, of my fidelity to France and my respect and untarnished regard for my person. The waste of all this bravery, devotion, and noble feeling on the corrupt and rapacious bourgeoisie who were still, in the eyes of the misguided Ragout, the banner bearers of liberty and equality. Romy refused to accept Ragout's resignation, and thenceforth civil war was inevitable. With the packet that contained Ramon's appointment were two other packets. What did they contain? We do not know, but it may well have been instructions to keep the two parties apart at all costs. Romoni did not want war, but he acted as if his business was to prevent a close understanding. Ragout's effort to resign, he intended to retire to France. The tone of his letters to Toussaint shows how uncertain he was. But the French government did not diabolically work with skill. Hundeville suggests that the Directory should even place the blame for the breach on his publicity so that as to not alarm Toussaint. The Directory expressed its regrets to Toussaint at seeing Hundeville's return, but professed to retain confidence in Toussaint. Yet Brooks, the colonial minister, wrote cordially to Ragout. Talleyrand, Minister of Foreign Affairs, wrote encouragingly both to Toussaint and to Ragout. Thus France kept the pot boiling merrily. Maitland left San Domingo on November 1798, and on December 12th the following appeared in the London Gazette. Quote, no event has happened in the history of the past war of more interest to the cause of humanity or to the permanent issues of Great Britain than the treaty which General Maitland has made with Black General Toussaint upon the evacuation of San Domingo. Quote, not even really a person doing any. Quote, but this treaty, the independence of that most valuable island, is in fact recognized and will be secured against all efforts which the French can now make to recover it, not merely without the expense of England of fortification or of armies, but with the benefit of securing to use its exclusive commerce. Quote, Toussaint's L'Overture is a black person, and in the jargon of war has been called a brigade. But according to all accounts, he is a black person born to vindicate the claims of his species and to show that the character of men is independent of exterior color. The late events of San Domingo will soon engage the public attention. They are such as are calculated to please all parties. It is a great point to rescue this formidable island for the grass of the Directory, from whence they had regained their footing. They might have incessantly menace and perhaps assailed the most favorite of our West Caribbean possessions. And on the other hand, it is a great point gained to the cause of humanity that black people domination is in fact constituted, the organize of the Caribbean under the command of a black chief or king, that the black race whom the Christian world to their infamy have been accustomed to degrade. Every liberal Briton will feel proud that this country brought about the happy revolution. The British, after having been driven out of the island in September, were opposing in December as the authors of, quote, the happy revolution, end quote, and rejoice at the freedom of a people to enslave whom they had just lost 100,000 men. In addition to soothing the nation, the national vanity, this lying notice would also, of course, be read by the Directory. Having thus driven another wedge between Toussaint and the French, Maitland then set out for America to negotiate a division of the trade with that country. Harcourt was sent on in advance to San Domingo, but Toussaint did not want to negotiate with the British at all. He challenged Harcourt about the notice which had appeared in the press. Harcourt returned the invasive answer and had an unbelievable, unintelligent to tell Toussaint that the British were making these arrangements with him, quote, not so much for any military or commercial advantage, but to witness to him their satisfaction at his good faith and punctuality in the execution of his arrangements, end quote. When Maitland got to America, he found that Toussaint had been making his own arrangement with the American government. The president had already authorized a trade agreement and appointed a trade representative to San Domingo. For no classes of people have black people suffered more than from the capitalists in Britain and America. They have been the most I can't say that word. I'm gonna look it up. But am I back? I thought so. It's pernicious. My bad. Pernicious preachings of race prejudice in the world. Yet the Americans vied with the British in compliments to Black Toussaint and San Domingo trade. John Hollingsworth of John Hollingworth and Company wrote to Toussaint that, quote, in you I place the most implicit confidence and have moreover the pleasure to add that as far as my information goes, I find the same to be prevalent, which to me is no small consolation, as I have advocated the proposed negotiations with my utmost endeavor, end quote. When the British agent learned how far Toussaint had gone with the Americans, they forgot their protestation of negotiation, only to please Toussaint, turned nasty and threatened that if their ships were not allowed in the harbors on the same terms as the Americans, British cruisers would blockade the island. That was Toussaint's dilemma. France was at war with Britain. Like all the French black people, he detested the British. But the San Domingo economy was on the verge of collapse. And though he tried to invade a trade agreement with the enemies of France, he had in the end to admit British ships flying the American and Spanish flag into San Domingo harbor. Ramon suggested that he should arrest Maitland as letter to Maitland and read him also his own reply to Ramon, indignantly repelling the base suggestion. Maitland was very much impressed. Maitland was much impressed. This whole convention was in every way irregular. Maitland knew that Toussaint had no authority. Toussaint knew that he had none. At the peace of all this problem would be resolved. In any case, to treat thus with Britain, actually at war with France, was a dangerous thing to do, but it was an act of wise and courageous statesmanship. Even Ramon, the agent of the French government, whom it placed in a very difficult position, had to admit that Toussaint was justified. The Directory itself approved of the arrangement with the United States. In the Montagnard of 26, okay, here we go, Vandermeer, and 8, October 19th, 1799, Toussaint attempt no secrecy, right? Are you there, Joe? Joe? He openly admitted that their secret clauses in the convention, mutual promises not to attack each other, but that these secret clauses were necessary for the salvation of San Domingo and were no treasons to France. Even Ragoud joined the chorus of praise. Thank you. Quote, although my enemies, always active to harm me, have managed to diminish your friendship for me, I am not the less an admirer of your talent and of your merit. I offer my tribute of praise which you deserve. But the trade with America could not have been arranged without the consent of the British. Ragoud, however, said nothing about this. Toussaint, on the other hand, excluded the ports of the South from the agreement. And even before he actually signed with Maitland on June 13th, 1799, he once more took the offensive against Ragoud. In a public proclamation, Ragoud defended himself with moving passions against the charge that he did not wish to obey Toussaint because Toussaint was black. Quote, indeed, if I had reached the stage where I would not wish to obey a black person, if I had the unintelligent presumption to believe that I am above such obedience, on what grounds could I claim obedience from the whites? End quote. What grievous example would I have given to those places under my orders? Besides, is there so great a difference between the color of the commander-in-chief and mine? It is a tint of color, more or less dark, which instills principles of philosophy or gives merit to an individual. And if one man is a little lighter.
What page are we on?
231. And if one man is a little lighter in color than another, does it follow that one must obey him in everything? I not willingly to obey a black person. Why? All my life, from my cradle, I have been obedient to black people. Isn't my birth the same as that of General Toussaint? Is it my mother who brought me into the world a black person? Have I not I not a black elder brother for whom I have always had a profound respect and who I have always obeyed? Who has given me the first principles of education? It is not a black person who was schoolmaster in the town of Les Cayes. Isn't it clear that I have been accustomed to obedience to black people all my life? And everyone everyone knows that first principles remain eternally graven in our hearts. I have consecrated my life to the defense of black people. From the beginning of the revolution, I have braved all the causes of liberty. I have not betrayed my principles and shall never do so. Besides, I am too much a believer in the rights of men to think that there is one color in nature superior to another. I know a man only as a man. End quote. These words could not have been written before July 14th, 1789. A true son of the revolution, Ragoud was hurt in his soul that people might think his quarrel with Toussaint was due to Toussaint's color. Toussaint was equally empathetic, and though he accused biracial people, class, they used the M-word, of conspiring against him, yet he disdained the charge of hated biracial peoples by pointing to the great number of them who were fighting in his army against Ragoud. Quote, without doubt, the susceptibilities, the jealousies born of the differences of color manifests themselves sometimes to an unreasonable degree, but the exogenes, how do you say that word?
I do not know.
It's time.
Oh, find out. Find out. See what I mean? The EX and the IG. It's like, how do I do that?
It said X. I can't do it.
Exigencies of the service and the severe discipline had more than ever fused the three colors in the rank of the army. The same state of things exists in civil administration, and this was one of the happiest consequences of political equality consecrated by the principles of the revolution. The rivalries of color were not then the initial case of the conflict which was beginning. They complicated it and became one of its elements when many officers of color in several parts of the country took Ragoud's side, and Toussaint had to treat them as traitors. This is the opinion of M. Paulson Sanan, himself a Haitian, and no one has written more wisely and profoundly on the San Domingo Revolution than Toussaint L'Ouverture. Very clearly, also, he sees the biracial peoples as a typical intermediate class with all the political instability of that class. Quote, there was always also more of a political traditions among the men of color, and the peculiar disposition often noticed which trended to make them particularly susceptible to all the hopes or anxieties which grew out of public events. It is this mental attitude which caused the struggle between the military chief to assume all the tendencies of a war of color, end quote. And he concludes, quote, Toussaint L'Ouverture did not detest the biracial people any more than Ragoud hated black people. And if each of them defended himself badly from the contrary sentiments which we attributed to each other in this respect, it was because they needed, each of them, the united force of a party in a conflict where the parties were confounded with the classes and the classes with the colors. People color, sorry, my bad. Toussaint, for a moment, seemed to have thoughts of winning over Boveas to his side, and through Boveas of binding the colony together. He published a proclamation attacking Ragud and praising Boveas. Boveas through a very amability. I wonder if that's that. Is that right? Amability. Make sure.
That sounds right.
I'm gonna make sure. I was almost close. It's amiability of character, which made him so beloved by everybody, played a miserable role in this crisis. He had declared boldly for Toussaint. Such was his influence and the strategic importance of his command that Ragud could hardly have fought at all. Had he declared for Ragud, Toussaint would have been in serious danger. But so slight was the class bitterness of color, feeling that the beginning of the struggle, that Boveas, a biracial person of the biracial peoples, could not decide. Finally, he threw up his command and sailed for France, honest to the last and unable to take sides in the fratricidal struggle maliciously kindled by the internal enemies of peace in San Domingo. Ragud struck first and took Govey. But this fine soldier, so brilliant against the English, at once audacious, tenacious, and careful, was at his worst at this crucial campaign. Here Ragud hesitated and looked to France. Toussaint looked to France for nothing. Sending Dessalines into the south, he traveled north to crush the revolt. Free black people of the north were revolting for Ragud, and even Pierre Michel, ancient slave, joined the revolt against Toussaint and was shot. Before the speed of Toussaint's movement and his ruthless execution of traitors, the rebels quelled, quotes, punish even with death those who attempted the last movement, end quote. Despite Ragud's vacillation, the biracial South fought magnificently at first. All this pride was roused, and their bitterness can be understood. There was all the old hatred between biracial people and black people. Toussaint had striven to moderate it, but it still remained. The Ragud brothers and the other biracial leaders had a great record of military and administrative success. From the very first day of the revolution, Ragud's achievements against the British were nearly as fine as Toussaint's. The moral of the biracial population was high. When towns were besieged by the British, the women ran along the ramparts, assisting the men with a fearlessness and a disregard that showed their revolutionary temper. All the biracial peoples were devoted to the Republic. Ragud had shot without mercy biracial peoples who were traitors, even though biracial women begged him on their knees to square them. He had deported the Emery whites. To them, it seemed that Toussaint, deceived by the old whites whom they hated and sold to the British, against whom they had shed so much blood, was at once a traitor to the Republic and a tyrant, seeking to establish a black domination. They fought like tigers. The war at last rested in the fate of Jacmel, blockade by land and sea. For 5 months, Jacmel held out under Petion, Petion, as usual, and usually able officer who had deserted from Toussaint. The besieged ate horses, dogs, cats, rats, old leather, the grass in the street, until there was nothing more to eat. Ragout, strangely inactive, fought resolutely, irresolutely, waiting for France. At last, Jamaica had hold out no longer. The starving garrison cut its way through Dessalines' men, and Toussaint's ultimately victory grew nearer. Bonaparte, victorious in the internal struggle of the bourgeoisie for power, was still too busy in Europe to deal with Saint Domingo. But Hindeville assured him that Toussaint was sold to the British. Toussaint's talk to Mosey and had been copied down by Mosey, White Secretary, and sent to France. Vincent's report, however, was wholly favorable to Toussaint. This did not change Bonaparte's plans, but Toussaint, for the time being, had to be humored. Bonaparte appointed a new commission consisting of Vincent, Raymond, and General Michel for making peace between the two combatants. Bonaparte had learned from Vincent that Toussaint was a protector of Europeans and, much more important, the most powerful man in the colony. He confirmed Toussaint in his post as commander-in-chief and governor, but carefully avoided taking any sides in the quarrel. Well, he did not write direct to Toussaint, but addressed a letter from the consuls to the citizens of San Domingo, assuring them of their liberty, but notifying them that by a new constitution he had given to the French, the colonies would no longer be represented in the French parliament, but only by governed by special laws. He asked that on the flags of the army an inscription should be written, telling them that they owed their liberties to France. When Vincent landed on San Domingo, race feeling was high. All over the colony, black people and biracial people were saying that the Civil War had been kindled by the whites to weaken both sides and restore slavery. The whites had taken Toussaint's side, but they were not pleased when he drafted them into the army and made them go and fight against Ragout. But the black laborers were heartily sick of commissioners from France. They say they did not want any white people to govern them. They would be governed by Toussaint. Mosey, who did not like Vincent, arrested him, and Vincent suffered a great privation and was nearly shot by guards. Toussaint apologized to Vincent, but the arrest could hardly have taken place without his orders, though the indignants were probably due to spontaneous race feelings. Toussaint had glad to get confirmation of his post as commander-in-chief from the new regime. In the war of proclamation that he was waging with Ragout, it was an unanswerable argument against the charge that he was a traitor to France. But the vagueness of the letter confirmed his worst suspicion. What were these special laws? Why had not Bonaparte written to him personally? He refused to inscribe the words on the banner. The first thing, however, was the war. The inhabitants of the South were tiring of the struggle. Toussaint said that someone ought to go to Ragout and asked Vincent whether he would dare. But when Vincent said yes, Toussaint was embarrassed. He feared a trap. It was on this visit that, for the first time, Vincent noticed that his presence was distasteful to Toussaint. Yet Vincent did go to Ragout, the ruler of the South, for so many years second in San Domingo history to Toussaint alone, was like a man distracted. During the interview, hatred for Toussaint overmastered his reason, and he seemed on the verge of committing self-unalivement. How could France confirm the traitor Toussaint in his command? he would continue his resistance. But Ragoud no longer had the confidence of his followers. Vincent was not only Toussaint's envoy, he was a representative of France. The population welcomed his coming. Why should they go on fighting? Why have they ever fought at all? Even during the truce which Vincent arranged, the inhabitants of one town, St. Louis, admitted Dessalines and his officers and entertained them to dinner. Vincent on one time feared his own life, so violent were the rage and despair of the cheating and deceived Ragoud. Ragoud planned to blow up Cavalion. And what'd you do? Don't do that. Where was it? Okay. The official capital of the South. But the captain of the garrison refused to allow it, realizing that at last that all was over. The unfortunate Ragoud set sail for France, refusing to meet Toussaint. He was shipwrecked and reached Paris only on April 7th, 1801. He sought an interview with Bonaparte, who listened in silence to his lengthy recital, then told him, quote, "General, I blame you for only one thing, not to have been victorious. In the years of its history, as an independent state of biracial people and black people of San Domingo have fought an unceasing struggle of the classes sometimes raising to civil war, as is common to all societies, rather homogeneous in color or not. But at the slightest threat of foreign invasion, they have always presented a solid front to the enemy. This lesson they were to learn had hard experience. Yet never was there so favorable an opportunity for a working arrangement as at the very beginning of their history under two such men as Toussaint and Ragoud, between whom was such mutual admiration and understanding unto Hundeville's arrival in the island. Hundeville's role does not concern us. The fatal error was Ragoud. He could not see as far as Toussaint saw when he politely but firmly declined to play the fly to Maitland's spider. With victory by August 1800, Toussaint had only half solved his problem. Hitherto he had been distinguished for his humanity towards beaten opponents and his conciliatory policy towards enemies, even the Emery whites, whom all Republican San Domingo hated and distrusted. But the garrison in the South, the officials, were still mainly biracial. To leave them as they were after the bitterness of the Civil War meant that if a French expedition landed, they would welcome it even more eagerly than when under Ragoud. 700 of Ragoud's finest soldiers left the South and went to Cuba, rather than serve under Toussaint. He asked Clairvaux, one of his biracial commanders, to govern the South. It was a concession to biracial sentiment, but Clairvaux refused. Thus the task of pacification fell unfortunately to Dessalines. Toussaint did not confiscate property, not even the property of those who had followed Ragoud, and abandoned the colony. 1/4 of the revenue from these plantations he gave to the laborers. One half he turned over to public treasury, and the other quarter was kept for the owners. Biracial women had conspired against him, but even during the war he said that he did not make war on women, would not pay much attention to their crackle. If they were proved guilty, he would merely imprison them. and see that no harm befell them, all through the provisions of the war. And immediately after, he treated them with special care. But he could not trust the army of Ragud, was as loyal to Ragud as his own army was to him. To cite the amnesty, therefore, he commanded Dessalines to purge the troops. 300 prisoners in Leogain were shot, and 50 others in Port Republican, nearly all officers. Toussaint had to put a stop to it. Quote, I said to prune the tree, not to uproot it, end quote. All things considered, he had been singularly humane. But the population of the South had made peace on Toussaint's word, which he had the reputation for never breaking. He had fought the British and the Spaniards and strictly observed all the rules of war. Many white emeries, traitors to their country, now enjoyed their plantations and lived happily and peacefulness under his protection after 4 years services in the British Army, while the South saw the brothers Ragud driven away and men who had shed their blood against these same whites for the Republic shot down in cold blood by Toussaint's soldiers. A great bitterness against Toussaint and Dessalines smoldered in the hearts of biracial peoples of the South. Toussaint knew that he had done what he had done, and the danger, he could not help it. At all costs, he had to have an army in the South on which he could depend when the French expedition landed. Hey, Doodley. The South was now under control. The next danger spot to be safeguarded was Spanish San Domingo. Bonaparte had expressly forbidden Toussaint to annex that colony. Toussaint would then be master of the whole island, all its resources and all its forts. But this was exactly the reason why Toussaint was going to take it. He was not going to leave his flank exposed to the French expedition. Romain had hitherto supported Toussaint against Ragud, even when the commission of Vincent, Raymond, and Michel was on its way. Ramon had written privately to them, expressing his admiration for the faith in Toussaint. His fear, lest power might turn his head, but his confidence that Toussaint would be embarked on a wild adventure of independence. Ramon had secret instructions to encourage Toussaint to make an attack on Jamaica. This would still further tie Toussaint's hands and cause a clear breach with Britain. Romain proposed the scheme to Toussaint, but Toussaint thought he did not oppose it, was not going to entangle himself with Britain to please France. Emissaries were sent to Jamaica to stimulate a revolt, though it was not certain whether they went from Ramon or from Ragud. The British, however, were so incensed that they seized armaments which Toussaint was transporting by sea for the siege of Jacmel. Jacmel. Immediately, Toussaint protested. The British paid him £1.5 million francs in compensation. The good relations were restored. Toussaint was determined not to quarrel with the British, and the British were determined not to quarrel with Toussaint. The scheme to embroil Toussaint with Jamaica had failed. It was over Spanish San Domingo that the clash came. The Spanish still retained control. Ramon, before he succeeded Hundeville as commissioner, had been merely a sort of resident ministry. In the last days of December, while still besieged Jacmel, Toussaint asked Roma for authority to annex the colony. The Spaniards, he said, were stealing black people from the French part of the island and selling them as slaves. This was true, but obviously only a pretext. Ramon had done his best, but he could support Toussaint no longer, for Bonaparte's orders were rigid. Ramon had to defend himself, and Toussaint had allowed British trade representatives in San Domingo. Roma published a proclamation calling on him to chase them from the colony and prove that the accusations of infidelity to France were untrue. Toussaint refused, and Ramon demanded permission. Hold on a second. Okay, go on. Oh, where am I at? I forgot where is that. Proclamation. Toussaint refused, and Ramon demanded permission to return to France. Toussaint could have marched to Spanish San Domingo, but he had to the full that care of dictators to legalize their most arbitrary acts. He wanted Ramon's authority. Suddenly, some thousands of black people set in motion by Toussaint's agent, chiefly Mosey, marched on Le Cap, threatening to pillage the town if Ramon did not sign the decree, which would save their brothers from slavery. Ramon refused. For nearly a fortnight, Le Cap stood in fear of destruction. To get him out of the way, Mosey commanded Vincent to go to Mole St. Nicholas. The laborers thought adamant, were disciplined, and maintained perfect order. At last, Toussaint came and demanded that Ramon sign. Quote, "My choice is made," Ramon replied. "France will avenge me." Toussaint threatened him. "If you do not sign the decree, it means the end of all the whites in the colony, and I shall enter Spanish territory with fire and sword." Ramon signed, but he wrote secretly to the Spanish governor, encouraged him not to hand over the colony to Toussaint's agents. Toussaint arrested Ramon and sent him to Dondon, where with his wife and 2 daughters he was kept under supervision. With Ramon's official authority, he and Moses marched on the Spanish San Domingo. The Spanish troops were routed, and on January 21st, 1800, the Spanish governor formally handed over the colony. Toussaint used his usual conciliatory methods. He appointed Clairvaux, the biracial person, to be ruler of the province, and his brother Paul to be commander of the garrison of San Domingo. He addressed proclamations to the inhabitants promising full amnesty, and these were scrupulously observed. He was now complete master of the whole island, a territory nearly as large as Ireland, and he had become so in less than 10 years. Quote, "I found the colony dismembered, ruined, overrun by the bandits of Jean Francisco, by the Spaniards, and by the English, who had fought over the bits. It is today purged of its enemies, quite pacified, and advanced towards its complete restoration." He had made the boost after the departure of Catalan. Now it was more than ever true. But there was still Bonaparte, with his, quote, "special laws," end quote. Before he left San Domingo, he wrote Bonaparte, asking for approval of what he had done. He accused Roma of intriguing against him and impeding his wishes to take possession of the former French colony. Quote, "Having decided to take possession by force of arms, I found myself obliged, before setting out, to invite Citizen Romain to detest from the performance of his duties and retire to Dondon until further orders. He waited for commands. When he wanted him, I will send him to you." There was defiance. Toussaint attempted no defense. Quote, "Whatever may be the, oh my gosh, the calamities? No. Is that right? Are you there?
Calamities.
Yay! That my enemy have seen fit to write to you against me. I shall abstain from from justifying myself. But although delicacy enforces silence upon me, my duties prescribe that I prevent Roma from doing harm. End quote. This was more than a defiance. It bordered oh my gosh, I can't say the simple word. It's that simple. It's perilous. Perilously to impertinence. And Bonaparte was the last man in the world to be terrified, to be trifled with. Toussaint had burnt his boats with visions and courage and determination. He was laying the foundation of an independent nation, but too confident in his own powers, he was making one dreadful mistake. Not with Bonaparte, nor with French government. And nothing does his genius stand out so much as in refusing to trust the liberties of black people to the promises of French and British imperialism. His error was his neglect of his own people. They did not understand what he was doing or where he was going. He took no trouble to explain. It was dangerous to explain, but still more dangerous not to explain. His temperament, close and self-contained, was one that kept its own counsel. Thus the masses, though thought he had taken Spanish San Domingo to stop slave traffic and not as a safeguard against the French. His silence confused them and did not deceive Bonaparte. Dessalines was fearless lieutenant. His fearless lieutenant had no such scruples. After the war with Ragoud, Dessalines told his soldiers, quote, the war you have just won is a little war, but you have two more big ones. One against the Spaniards, who do not want to give up their land and who have insulted your brave commander-in-chief. And the others against France, who will try to make you slaves again. As soon as she has finished with her enemies, will win those wars. That was and still is the way to speak to the masses. And it is no accident that Dessalines and not Toussaint finally led the island to independence. Toussaint shut up within himself, immersed in diplomacy, went his tortuous ways, overconfident that he had only to speak and the masses would follow. That's the end of chapter 10. Interesting. Anybody have any questions on chapter 10? Okay. Doesn't sound like it. Interesting turn of events here. Toussaint making mistakes, maybe making a mistake, and having to fight against the Spanish and the French. So looks like we're gonna find out more. It seems like maybe, I don't know. Let's find out more of the mistake. All right. Chapter 11, the Black Consul. 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 Is that right, Landon? Did I say it right? Consul? Console? No one's there. Okay. I'll try.
No, I'm hitting all the wrong buttons.
Console, right? Concul. Console?
Yeah, it's console. I'm also eating ice cream. So I'm eating ice cream, balancing the tablet and the phone and all that.
Okay. Yeah, no worries.
Okay.
So long as the war lasted between France and Britain, Toussaint was safe. But peace might come at any moment now, and with peace would come Bonaparte's special laws. The colony was devastated by 12 years of civil and foreign wars. Of the 30,000 whites in the colony in 1789, only 10,000 remained. The rest had been killed or had immigrated. Of the 40,000 free biracial people and free black people, there were still about 30,000, while of the 500,000 black slaves, perhaps 1/3 had perished. Plantation and cultivation had been destroyed far and wide. For nearly 10 years, the population, corrupt enough before, had been trained in bloodshed and soaked in violence. Bands of marauders roamed the countryside, and only discipline forced was the army and Toussaint instituted military dictatorship. The ultimate guarantee of freedom was the prosperity of agriculture. This was Toussaint's slogan. The danger was that black people might slip into the practice of cultivating a small patch of land, producing such sufficient for their needs. He would not allow the old estates to be broken up, but bound the interests of the laborers to their work by giving them their keep and a fourth of the produce. The generals of command of the districts were responsible for the industry of laborers and the prosperity of cultivation. He confined black people to plantation under rigid penalties, but was battling with the colossal task of transforming slave plantations after years of license into a community of free laborers. And he was doing it in the only way he could see. On behalf of the laborers, he saw to it that they were paid. Their quarters were produced. Their quarter was produced. This alone was sufficient to mark the change from the old to the new despotism. For behind this despotism, the new order was vastly different from the old. The black laborers were free, and though there might be dissatisfaction with the new regime, as in Paris of the 1800s, there was no regret for the old. Where formerly the laborers had worked from dawn until far into the night, now work began at 5 and ended at 5. No employer dared to beat them. Dessalines whipped black people in his providence, and Toussaint threatened to take away his command at the least complaint. It was not only humanity in any regime which tolerates such practices was doomed, for the revolution had created a new race of men. The change had first expressed itself in August 1791. Romain, who knew the black laborers as well as any other Frenchman, has traced it in detail. In the North, they came out to sustain royalty, nobility, and religion against the poor whites and the patriots. But they were soon formed into regiments and were hardened by fighting. They organized themselves into armed sections and into popular bodies. And even while fighting for the royalty, they adopted instinctively the rigid observed all forms of republican organization. Slogans of rallying cries were established between the chiefs and sections of division, and gave them points of contact from one extremity of the plains to the towns of the north and the other. This guaranteed the leaders a means of calling out the laborers and sending them back at will. These forms were extended to the districts in the West Province and were faithfully observed by the black laborers. Rather fighting for Spain and royalty or for the Republic, Ramon assured Bonaparte that he recognized these slogans, even during the insurrection which forced him to authorize the taking of Spanish San Domingo. In 1911, Hilaire Belloc, writing of the French Revolution, claimed that this instinctive capacity of the masses for revolutionary organization was something particularly French. It was an error. At the same time as the French, the half-esword slaves of San Domingo were showing themselves subject to the same historical laws as the advanced workers of revolutionary Paris. And over a century later, the Russian masses were to prove once more that this innate power will display itself in all populations when deeply stirred and given a clear perspective by a strong, trusted leadership. The people were strongly disciplined, even when they crowded into Le Cap and threatened Ramon. Their conduct was orderly. They destroyed nothing, merely presented their demands that the slave traffic of Spanish San Domingo be stopped, and waited, yeah. At the bottom of popular movement had acquired an immense self-confidence. The former slaves had defeated white colonists, Spaniards and British, and now they were free. They were aware of French politics, for it concerned them closely. Black men who had been slaves were deputies in French Parliament. Black men who have been slaves negotiated with the French and foreign governments. Black men who have been slaves filled the highest position in the colony. There was Toussaint, the former slave, incredibly grand and powerful, and incomparably the greatest man in San Domingo. There was no need to be ashamed of being black. The revolution had awakened them, had given them the possibility of achievement, confidence, and pride. That psychological weakness and feeling of inferiority with which the imperialists poisoned the colonial peoples everywhere, these were gone. Ramon and the other Frenchmen who lived in San Domingo and knew the people created by the revolution never ceased to warn the French government of the catastrophe that would follow any attempt to restore slavery, or indeed impose its will on these people in any way by force. The biracial people and the old free black people resented Toussaint's despotism, but the masses at first gave him their fullest confidence. Sure of himself, Toussaint reorganized the administration with boldness and skill. He divided the island into 6 departments, and the boundaries that he fixed remained to this day. He created ordinary courts of law and 2 courts of appeal, one in the French part of the island and one in the Spanish part, and the Supreme Court of Appeal in the capital. There were also special military courts to deal quickly with robberies and crimes on the high road, plentiful since the years of revolution and war. The finance of old regimes was complicated and irksome. Toussaint demanded first, end quote, enact exact inventory of our resources, then abolish the numerous duties and taxes which were only a source of fraud and abuse. He had the gourdie, the local unit of money, a uniform value for the whole island. All merchandise and produce imported or exported paid a duty of 20%. All fixed property paid the same. There was the same duty on everything manufactured for consumption in the colony. Thus he was able to get rid of numerous officials whom the old system demanded. Each taxpayer knew how much he had to pay, and the simplicity of the system and his strict supervision raised the standard of probity. Let me find out what that word means. Put him back. Probity. In his taxation, he was feeling his way. He lowered the tax on fixed property from 20 to 10%, and on the advice of Stevens, the United States Council, it all together soon afterwards. The 20% tax on imports acted as a check on the purchases of the merchants, and Toussaint lowered it to 10%. Later, to encourage the poor, he lowered the duty on articles of the first necessity to 6%. He was learning quickly. All this was taking place in the course of the year 1801, sorry. Contraband had been the feature of the old regime. Toussaint organized a maritime police. Merchants who trade abroad were carefully scrutinized. Their names were placed on a list in custom houses, and they could be struck off for dishonesty. For a similar offense, the customs officials could be sent to the military tribunal. Against all defaulting officials, Toussaint was merciless. Against Raymond, who had sided with Ramun, asked him, Toussaint bore no grudge. Raymond had ability, and Toussaint appointed him administrator of the national estates, an important source of revenue. Spanish San Domingo presented a special problem. It was backward, and the Spaniards hated Toussaint and his black generals. He trusted to wise administration and his conciliatory policies to win them over. He gave them their own appeal court. He repaired the old roads and built a splendid new one from San Domingo to Laxavon, 200 miles. Hello, Mr. Carrot. Carrot. 200 miles along. There were only 22 sugar factories in the whole of the Spanish part. A little cultivation, the inhabitants depending on timber and cattle breeding for their few wants. He invited them to embark on cultivation in the French style. He lowered their import and export duty to 6% in consideration of the poverty of the country. To encourage cultivation, he prohibited the export of timber, but modified this rule later. He was struck with a potential wealth of Spanish San Domingo and issued a glowing description of it, inviting settlers and offering concessions. Toussaint knew the backwardness of the laborers. He had them work, but he wanted to see them civilized, in advancing culture. He established such schools as he could. A sincere Catholic, a believer in the softening effect of religion on manners. He encouraged the practice of Catholic religion and wrote to that old friend of black people, the Abbé Goguryea, for advice. He favored legitimate children and soldiers who were married and forbade his officials and commandants white society. He was anxious to see black people acquire the social deportment of the better class whites with their Versailles manners. Struck by the carriage and bearing of a French officer, he said to those around him, quote, "My son will be like that," end quote. Around himself as governor, he instituted social circles, quote unquote, great and small. All who were invited to a great circle had to attend. He himself wore the undressed uniform of the regimental officer, contrasting with the brilliance of the uniforms around him. When he appeared, the whole company, men and women, rose. He went around the hall speaking to everyone, and then retired by the same door at which he had entered, bowing right and left to the company. The quote-unquote small circles was in the nature of the public audience. All the citizens entered the grand hall and the governor's palace, and Toussaint spoke to them as was convenient. After a time, he retired to a small apartment in front of his bedroom, which he used as a study, inviting those persons with whom he wanted to talk. These were usually the more distinguished white men, who had the knowledge and experience that he needed and that were so sadly lacking in the laborers and some of his generals. There they talked of France, which they had never seen, of religion, agriculture, commerce. When he wished to conclude, his audience here rose, and the company retired, Toussaint accompanying them to the door. He erected fine buildings in Le Cap and built a huge monument to commemorate the abolish of slavery, personal industry, social morality, public education, religious toleration, free trade, civic pride, racial equality. This ex-slave strove, according to his lights, to lay their foundation in a new state. In all this proclamation, laws and decrees, he insisted on moral principles, the necessity for work, respect for law and order, pride in San Domingo, veneration for France. He sought to lift the people to some understanding of the duties and responsibilities of freedom and citizenship. It was the propaganda of a dictatorship, but not the base personal ends of a narrow interest of one class oppressing another. His government, like the absolute monarchy, it in its progressive days, balanced between the classes, but this was rooted in the preservation of the interests of the laboring poor, with the growth of a black ruling class. Implications were arising already, but for the period, his form of government was the best. Success crowned his laborers. Cultivation prospered, and the new San Domingo began to shape itself with astonishing quickness. At Le Cap was built a Hotel de la République, all in French, of a style which would compare with the finest that existed in any part of the world. It was frequented by black people, local whites and Americans, all on the footing of equality. At the same table sat private individuals, the generals and officers of every rank, the high officials. Toussaint went there regularly, taking his place in any vacant seat. Like any of the rest, he said often that distinctions of rank had no place outside the public service. Race prejudice, the curse of San Domingo for 200 years, was vanishing fast. Some of the Americans were married to biracial women. The stigma of color could not flourish when so many black people and biracial people filled the highest positions of in the country. Travelers who saw Le Cap during the wonderful year agreed that a new spirit was in the country. The theaters began to play again, and some of the black people players showed a remarkable talent. No doubt the poor sweated and were backward so that the new ruling class might have thrived. But at least they too were better off than they had been. While on the one hand, the authority, social ease, and culture of those who a dozen years before had been slaves amazed all their observers. The success of Toussaint's administration can be judged by the fact that in a year and a half he had restored cultivation to 2/3 of what it had been in the most flourishing days of the old regime. Those were the ideas and the methods of the government of Toussaint. The revolution had made him, but it would be a vulgar error to suppose that the creation of the disciplinary army and the defeat of the English and the Spaniards, the defeat of Ragoud, and the establishment of a strong government all over the island, the growth of harmony between races, the enlightened aims of the administration. It would be a crude error to believe that all these were inevitable. At a certain stage in the middle of 1794, the potentialities in the chaos began to be shaped and soldered by his powerful personality. And thenceforth, it is impossible to say where the social forces end and the impress of the personality begins. It is sufficient that, but for him, this history would be something entirely different. It is therefore essential for us to consider what sort of man he was. It was his prodigious activity, which I have to appeal. Hold on, I gotta appeal. Hello. Hello, Gray. Welcome in. Yeah, he's a big moderate, by the way. Yeah, I get it. It's not socialism. It's not communism, for sure. Yeah, I agree. You know, nobody ever knew that he was doing. If he was leaving, if he was staying, rather he was going whence he was coming. He had hundreds of thoroughbred horses scattered in stables all over the country, and he habitually covered 225 miles a day, riding far in advance of his guards and arriving at his destination alone, or with one or two well-mounted attendants. The inspection of agriculture, commerce, fortification, municipalities, and schools, even the distribution of prizes to successful scholars. He was tireless in performing these duties all over the country, and none knew when and where the governor would appear. He deliberately cultivated his mysteriousness. He would leave a town in his carriage surrounded by his guards. Then some miles away, he would step out of it and ride in the opposite direction. And after these lightning dashes across the country, he was able to go into his cabinet and dictate hundreds of letters until far into the early morning. He dictated to 5 secretaries at once. And as he told Hundeville during one of their quarrels, he took full responsibility for anything that bore his signature, signing nothing that he did not read himself. He carried into his correspondence the same methods that he used in his administration. One secretary would write down half an important letter. Toussaint would then send him 60 miles away and conclude it by means of another. He was as completely mastered of his body as of his mind. He slept but 2 hours every night, and 4 days would be satisfied with 2 bananas and a glass of water. Physically, without fear, he had to guard against being poisoned, and in the various villages where he stayed, he had old black women prepare for him callalous, a kind of vegetable broth. He could trust these old women. They had no ambition and were too proud of him to do him any harm. In the field he slept, dressed, booted, and spurred. In the towns he always kept near to his bed and pair of trousers. At all hours of the night, couriers and officers found him ready to receive them with becoming dignity. His control over his soldiers was not due only to his skill as a general. He had that reckless physical bravery that makes men follow a leader in the most forlorn causes. From the beginning of his career to the end, he charged at the head of his men whenever the supreme efforts was required. In one battle, he chased the Spanish commander alone for nearly a mile and brought back 2 prisoners, and in 10 years was wounded 17 times. Even on his ordinary trips, he took all sorts of risks. When he was already commander-in-chief, he was nearly drowned in trying to cross a swollen river on horseback, and escaped only by getting rid of his sword. He could make soldiers accomplish the seemingly impossible. In the march on Spanish San Domingo, he wanted speed. The men were doing over 40 miles a day and had to be checked to wait for the cavalry. He seemed to bear a charmed life. During the Civil War against the South, his enemies tried to ambush him twice. The first time, his doctor, who was sitting in the carriage with him, was killed at his side. Several of his officers were unmounted, and the plum of his hat was cut away by a bullet. A little later, on the same journey, his coachman was killed and his carriage riddled with bullets. Only a few minutes before, he had left the carriage and was at the time riding some distance away. No wonder he came in the end to believe in himself as a black Spartacus, foretold by Renaud as a predestined to achieve the emancipation of black people. The laborers in their turn worshipped him as a direct servant of God. His aides were black people, none of them his nephew. Despite the broadness of his view and his conciliatory aims, Toussaint kept his army overwhelmingly black and ex-slaves. But his personal advisors were all white men. Vincent Pascal, who had come as secretary to the commission in 1796, and 2 Italian priests. He liked to talk to the rich white planters, but no person, nor man nor woman, ever had any influence on him. He seems to have had one friend and in all his life, Levex. Impenetrable, he trusted no one, confident in no one. If he had a weakness, it was in keeping people mystified. Yet he guarded his reputation and was careful in his contacts with people. He had an extraordinary faculty of satisfying all who came to see him, and was known all over the island as a man who never broke his word. Even Sinothax, the Jacobin lawyer, and a very finished intrigued himself, said in the French chamber that Toussaint was incapable of telling lies. But this was before Toussaint accused him of plotting independence. Despite his awkwardness, of building ugliness, of features, he managed in the end to make a strong impression upon all with whom he came in contact. He had in the last years an unusual distinction of carriage. His steps was material, his manner commanding. All right, let me look ahead here. We're on 252. Let me look ahead. 252. Oh my gosh. Looks like we have a long ways to go. 252. Yeah. 252. Whew. Yeah, 252. Yeah, I'm going to have to find a stopping point. 252. 252. All right. We're going to have to find a stopping point. I'm not stopped yet. Simple in his private life, he wore resplendent uniforms on state occasions, and his aides de camp followed his example of elegance and display. He knew how to listen to the subordinate officers with dignity and yet with I can't say the damn word. Let me go look at it. Affability. Okay. He could acknowledge he could acknowledge marks of public respect and affection, while avoiding them with easy good nature. With all classes of people, he found instinctively the right method. When the black laborers came to him, nervous about their liberty and white domination, he would take a glass vase and fill it with grains of black maize, then put a few grains in white maize. Quote, "You are a black maize. The whites who would enslave you are the white maize." End quote. He then shook the glass and showed it to them. Quote, "See, the white ones only here and there. The black ones went away reassured." They came to him saying that they did not wish to obey their either whites or biracial people due in all probability to some insults or injustices meted out to them by these former masters. Toussaint took a glass of wine and a glass of water, mixed them together, and showed the results. Quote, how can you tell which is which? We must all live together, end quote. They went away satisfied. The black people who wanted the post of judge came to see Toussaint. He was unfitted for the post, but Toussaint did not want to hurt his feelings. You know Latin? Of course, said Toussaint. Latin. Toussaint reeled off a string of cheap Latin phrases that he had picked up probably from official documents and the church service. The applicant retired, satisfied that he was incompetent and marveling at the knowledge of the governor. He was absolutely at home with the masses of the people, and yet at the same time, men like Matalan and the local whites were astonished at the singular courtesy and charm of his manners. There was nothing of the rough diamond about Toussaint. 3 white women of the ancient regime living abroad wrote to him asking for the restoration of their properties. Toussaint replied showing some of the secrets of his success with all classes of people. Hold on a second. We still got 10 minutes. Let's see here.
They got 8 minutes.
Yeah. We have received the letter with which you have been so kind to honor me. I have always done as much as lies in my power to preserve the property of each and every one, our citizens, has not suffered from unhappy events inevitable in a revolution. It is intact. The power to remove the sequestration under which it lies does not rest with me. That is in the hands of the agents of the directory. I can only assure you that his decision will be punctually executed. Quote, for more than 3 years, citizens, I have asked the citizens of Deschutes, your mother, to come back to her property. My advice, unhappily for her and for you, has not prevailed over that of her brother. There was still time to profit by the proclamation carried, the name and authorization of the French government. Your mother has, however, preferred to follow the fate of her brother, Coquerel, rather than remain in Saint Mark. To profit by the advantages of amnesty and retake possession of her property, she has left with her brother. It no longer depends on me to get her to come back home. Quote, in regard to the husband of the citizen Fontaine, I can no longer prevent him from being written down as an emery. That would be to place myself above the law, and that has never entered my mind nor my principles. When the agents decide to raise their sequestration, I shall neglect nothing to put the citizens frontier, whom I recommend to me, in a position to look after your interest in the most advantageous manner. In my advice can be of any use to him, I should give it to him if he wishes it, with the greatest pleasure, being happy to seize the opportunity to witness the infinite value which I attach to your goodwill on every occasion that it is in harmony with my duty. Quote, accept, citizens, the assurance of my respect and regards. I sincerely wish the happiness of you all, and return of your mother to your arms. Let's do... Oh, that might be a good stopping point. Oh, yeah.
I think we're at a good stopping point.
Yeah. Boom, boom. Okay. Let me go get my stuff real quick. Okay, right back. Hold on. Who's in here? Yeah. They don't have much coins, my friend. Wish I had more coins. Oh yeah. This. Need this. All right. Does anybody have anything to say what we just read?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was very educational, but I wasn't able to pay as close of attention as I wanted to. So I missed a lot of the beginning stuff.
Okay. All right. What was educational about it? Do you know? You remember?
Well, like, it looks like Tassan is basically going, like, he's got to have to just take over. Like,
He already has.
everyone's, yeah, but, like, he's got to be, like, well, I know that he has an unfaithful end, but he should have had a chance to be king.
I don't know about the king part. But it goes to show you that when you give people a chance to actually develop and grow and to create things, that they're more than capable and they exceed at it. When you give people actually the guidance and the know-how, say, hey, guess what? You're more than capable of implementing these things and learning from them. So they said they learned fast, and he did set up a whole bunch of stuff from no experience. So that was good. That was good part. Yeah, I would say that it's not leading into socialism yet, or not yet, but still, it's liberation. It's still liberation. It's a transformation from the old sets of developments into a new set of developments of things too. So, yeah. What were you gonna say?
I don't remember.
All right. Okay. No worries. No worries. So tomorrow is Wednesday. So we'll be reading this on Wednesday, 254. Perhaps it is in his correspondence. Remember that part. That's where I'm at. And I'll probably go back a paragraph just to see. 254. So I don't know. How much more you got left?
In that case, we should learn how to say that. Do you see that word? That's Desaline.
That's the name of a person.
Yeah, and that person's name is Desaline. If their name is going to start coming up a lot more, you should probably... Let's get that one down.
Well, if I don't get it down, it's going to be fine too anyways. Desalines.
Desaline.
All right, then. Does anybody have any questions? Desalines is the liberationist. Oh, okay. Jean Jacobins Dessalines. All right, thank you, Gray. Thank you, Gray. Appreciate that. All right, thank you. So, all right then. Well, if no one has any questions or anything up, I'm going to go ahead and close it out. Hopefully tomorrow we might have more people to participate. That'd be kind of cool. Be nice, but we'll still continue the way we do because I can only advance more if I have more participation. So, thank you for participating, Joe.